$300,000 vanished before sunrise. Not from my bank account. From hers. And the sound that woke the neighborhood wasn't an explosion. It was wood snapping. Slow. Wet. Inevitable. By the time the sun crawled over the tree-line, the HOA president was standing waist-deep in mud, screaming at a lake that used to obey her. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because the real story didn't start with beavers. It started with inheritance papers, and a woman who thought a clipboard made her a god. 6 months ago, my divorce papers were still warm. 24 years of marriage ended with a signature and a monthly alimony check that felt like salt in an open wound. I was 52, tired, sleeping on my brother's couch, wondering how my life shrank so quietly. Then the lawyer called. My grandfather was gone. And he left me everything. 12 acres. A private spring-fed lake. No public access. No easements. No HOA ownership. Just water, trees, wildlife, and a small, weathered fishing cabin that smelled like cedar, old coffee, and peace. The lake sat right in the middle of suburban Colorado, completely surrounded by Willowbrook estates. You know the kind. Identical $500,000 houses. Lawns trimmed like military haircuts. Neighbors who smile while reporting you. My grandfather's land didn't match. And that made it a problem. I hadn't even finished unpacking when she showed up. Vivian Blackstone. 58 years old. Bleached blonde hair frozen in place with enough spray to survive a hurricane. Designer sunglasses at 7 a.m. A white BMW with custom plates that actually read, Hobos. I wish I were joking. I smelled her before I saw her. Jasmine perfume layered so thick it felt aggressive. She marched up my gravel driveway in heels that had never touched dirt before, clipboard tucked under one arm, measuring tape dangling from manicured fingers like a threat. Mr. Thornfield, she said, skipping hello. I'm Vivian Blackstone, president of the Willowbrook Homeowners Association. I nodded. Said nothing. She didn't wait for permission. Just walked past me, eyes scanning the lake like it was already hers. This, she said, snapping her tape measure open with a sharp crack, is a non-compliant water feature. Non-compliant. Like my grandfather's life's work was a broken mailbox. She explained, slowly, smugly, that the HOA had updated its environmental standards. Any water feature over a certain size now required impact studies, permits, and compliance fees. $500 a day. Plus legal costs. I told her the lake had been there since 1962. Fully private. Deeded. Surveyed. She smiled the way people do when they've already decided you don't matter. I understand your emotional attachment, she said, writing anyway. But community standards evolve. Then she leaned closer and lowered her voice. You know, she added casually, this lake would make a beautiful shared amenity. The HOA board has been discussing options. That was the moment I realized something. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was laying groundwork. And I had no idea yet how far she was willing to go, or how badly she was about to regret underestimating both me and nature. The first letter arrived 3 days later. Certified mail. Thick envelope. Official tone. The HOA was initiating a compliance review of my property due to potential environmental violations. Translation: Vivian had decided my lake was her next conquest. Every week after that, something new appeared. A surveyor standing at my shoreline without permission. A drone buzzing low over the water like a mechanical mosquito. Bright orange flags stabbed into my grass, marking boundaries that didn't exist. Each time, I called the HOA office. Each time, I got Vivian. Oh, Mr. Thornfield. She'd sigh, like I was exhausting her. These are standard preliminary steps. If you cooperate, this can all go very smoothly. Smoothly for who was the real question. Then came the fines. $500 a day. 4. Unauthorized water retention. 4. Shoreline instability. 4. Unapproved wildlife presence. Yes. She fined me for wildlife. I hired a lawyer. A good one. He reviewed the deeds, the surveys, the original filings from the county. You're clean, he said. Very clean. This lake is ironclad private property. So why does it feel like I'm losing? I asked. He paused. Then answered honestly. Because HOAs don't win by being right. They win by bleeding you dry. That's when the real pressure started. One morning, I woke to construction noise. Across the lake, on HOA-controlled land, workers were driving pylons into the water. Barges. Floating platforms. Untreated lumber stacked high like kindling. I drove over. Asked what the hell was going on. Vivian was already there. Hard hat on. Red blazer over it like she was on a magazine cover. We're building a temporary floating structure, she said sweetly. A community dining experience. Completely compliant. A restaurant, I said flatly. She smiled wider. A floating restaurant, she corrected. With panoramic lake views. Investors are very excited. My stomach dropped. She was using my lake to force my hand. She didn't own the water. But she knew something important. Lakes don't respect property lines. And if she could get enough activity, enough community use, she could argue implied access. Public benefit. Regulatory intervention. A slow-motion land grab. I told her to stop. Told her she was trespassing. She handed me another notice. Cease interference with authorized HOA development. It read. The restaurant went up fast. Too fast. Cheap wood. No sealant. No wildlife deterrence. No environmental assessments I could find. And that's when a memory surfaced. Something my grandfather used to say when I was a kid, watching ripples spread across the water at dusk. Never fight a lake head-on, he'd tell me. Work with what lives in it. That night, I didn't call my lawyer. I opened a different folder. One labeled Protected Species, State Environmental Code. And I smiled. Because Vivian had made one fatal mistake. She built her illegal dream restaurant in the middle of an ecosystem that already had engineers far better than her. And they worked for free. At dawn the next morning, I stood knee-deep at the far end of the lake, where the water narrowed and slowed. Quiet. Still. Alive. Most people think beavers are cute. Harmless. Cartoon animals chewing sticks. They're wrong. Beavers are nature's most aggressive construction workers. Tireless. Precise. And this part mattered, protected by law. I'd seen the signs for weeks and ignored them before. Fresh gnaw marks on aspen trunks. Mud-packed channels along the reeds. Small dams forming and disappearing overnight like test runs. They were already here. Vivian didn't know that. Or worse, she didn't care. I spent that day making calls. Not to contractors. Not to lawyers. To the State Wildlife Relocation Office. Historic habitat? The biologist asked. Yes, I said calmly. Documented. Pre-subdivision. And human disturbance? Significant. New construction. Noise. Untreated lumber in open water. She exhaled. We've been looking for a relocation site exactly like that. I didn't move a single animal. Didn't trap. Didn't bait. Didn't interfere. I simply removed barriers. Opened up access points. Cleared debris blocking old channels. Let the lake remember itself. That night, the beavers went to work. By sunrise, the first investor tour arrived. Vivian stood on the dock in a white linen suit, sunglasses flashing, champagne already poured. That's when the screaming started. One support beam collapsed inward, chewed clean through at the base. Then another. Water rushed in low and fast. Chairs tipped. Tables slid. Bottles shattered. The floating restaurant listed hard to one side. Vivian's face strained of color as her shoes filled with muddy water. "Do something!" she shrieked at the crew. But there was nothing to do. Because everything happening was natural. By noon, the restaurant was half submerged. By dusk, it was gone. Wood floated like bones. Fabric soaked and sank. Money vanished into the lake. $300,000. Insurance refused to pay. Environmental damage due to illegal construction. The denial letter read. That night, Vivian showed up at my cabin. Hair wild. Mascara streaked. Designer jacket ruined. You did this, she hissed. I held up my phone. Not a threat. Just a document. State wildlife statutes. Highlighted. Beavers are protected, I said softly. Interfering with them is a felony. She froze. You built untreated wood in open water, I continued. In a known habitat. Without permits. That's on you. Her mouth opened. Closed. Then her phone rang. Her attorney. I could hear the panic through the speaker. Because while she was busy sinking her investors' money, the state had opened a full environmental investigation. And the HOA board? They were already looking for someone to blame. By the end of the week, the HOA newsletter stopped sounding confident. The tone shifted. Shorter sentences. Legal language replacing smug optimism. Temporary pause in development initiatives. Pending regulatory review. Board meeting rescheduled. Translation panic. I started getting calls from neighbors I'd never spoken to before. People who used to wave politely from behind perfect hedges. Hey, is it true the restaurant wasn't permitted? Are we really on the hook for environmental fines? Vivian says it's all under control, but I never badmouthed her. I didn't need to. I just said, you might want to read the state statutes yourself. Meanwhile, inspectors showed up. Not one. 5. Unmarked trucks. Clipboards. Drones. Soil samples taken from the shoreline. Water quality tests run near the sunken wreckage. The beavers? Completely unbothered. They expanded their work like they'd been promoted. New dams formed upstream. Water levels shifted subtly. Shorelines changed. Not flooding, but enough to expose how fragile the HOA's landscaping really was. Manicured lawns turned soggy. Sprinkler systems failed. Foundations started cracking. Vivian tried to spin it. Emergency HOA meeting. Standing room only. She took the podium, voice tight but practiced. This is an unforeseen environmental complication, she said. We are victims here. That's when old Mr. Callahan raised his hand. Then why? He asked slowly. Did you ignore the wildlife assessment request from the county last year? Murmurs spread. Vivian's eyes flicked toward the board. Another hand went up. And why did HOA funds pay for private investor lunches at the lake? Silence. I watched from the back row as the story collapsed in real time. Because here's the thing about HOAs, they thrive on control, but they die under sunlight. 2 days later, Vivian resigned. Officially. For health reasons. Unofficially, the board had reviewed emails. Payments. Forged signatures. The state fined the HOA heavily. Then fined Vivian personally. 6 figures. The investors sued. The insurance companies walked away. The floating restaurant became an environmental cleanup case study. And the lake? It healed. Within weeks, the water cleared. The beavers stabilized the banks better than any contractor ever could. Fish returned to the shallows. Birds nested again. One evening, I sat on the dock my grandfather built, watching the sunset burn gold across the surface. A neighbor walked over. One of the ones who used to avoid eye contact. You know, he said. We thought you were the problem. I smiled. Most people do, at first. The HOA rewrote its bylaws after that. Stripped back authority. Added real environmental protections. Required independent reviews. They never touched my property again. And sometimes, late at night, when the lake is quiet and the moonlight ripples across the water, I hear it. The soft splash. The gnaw of teeth on wood. Nature doing what it's always done. Protecting what's hers. You'd think that would have been the end of it. Resignation. Fines. Public humiliation. But Vivian Blackstone wasn't done yet. 2 weeks after stepping down, I found a notice taped to my cabin door. Not from the HOA. From a private developer. They were exploring acquisition opportunities around the lake and wanted to discuss mutually beneficial options. I laughed out loud. That night my lawyer called. Someone's been digging, he said. Quietly. Vivian. Turns out, she'd been trying to sell the idea of my lake for years. Long before the restaurant. Long before the fines. Whispering to developers about a future resort, luxury homes, private docks. There was just one problem. She never owned it. Never had rights to it. Never had permission. And now, thanks to the investigation, all her communications were discoverable. Emails. Texts. Side deals. Including one where she claimed the HOA had implicit control over the water. That phrase triggered something deep in county records. A title examiner flagged it. Then a historian. Then the state land office. Because buried in those yellow documents my father once mentioned was something extraordinary. A 1961 water rights decree. Filed before the subdivision. Before the HOA. Before zoning codes were rewritten. It didn't just give my family ownership. It gave exclusive control over water use, access, and development, forever. The county recorder called it rare. The state attorney used another word. Untouchable. Vivian's last move backfired so hard it cemented my position permanently. The HOA's lawyers advised immediate settlement. They paid for shoreline restoration. Issued a formal apology. Recorded a permanent easement barring HOA access to the lake. And Vivian? She disappeared. White BMW gone. House sold at a loss. Name scrubbed from HOA history like she'd never existed. One morning, I found a single envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a check. Personal. Handwritten. Refund of every fine I'd ever paid. And a note with just 4 words. I misjudged you. I folded it, tossed it into the fire, and watched it burn. Because the truth was simpler than all of it. This was never about revenge. It was about boundaries. And some things, like land, water, and legacy, aren't for sale. After everything settled, the lake felt different. Not quieter. Not calmer. Stronger. Word spread fast through the county. About the HOA. About Vivian. About the floating restaurant that vanished overnight like it never existed. People started showing up. Not tourists. Not developers. Officials. Environmental planners. University researchers. Wildlife specialists. They wanted to study the beaver activity. The water clarity. The natural shoreline restoration that happened without a single machine. Turns out my grandfather's old irrigation pond had become a textbook example of sustainable land stewardship. One professor stood at the edge of the dock, shaking his head in disbelief. Most HOAs spend millions trying to fake this, he said. You let nature do it for free. I thought about Vivian's restaurant. The untreated beams. The champagne glasses floating like debris. And I smiled. The HOA tried one last thing. A community partnership proposal. Carefully worded. No demands. Just a request to collaborate on educational signage near the lake. My lawyer asked what I wanted to do. I didn't even hesitate. No. Not angry. Not petty. Final. Some places don't need signs. They need silence. That fall, I rebuilt the fishing cabin. Same footprint. Same wood. Same view. Just stronger beams and better insulation. On the wall, I hung an old photo of my grandfather standing knee-deep in the lake, holding a bass and grinning like he owned the world. Maybe he did. One evening, as the sun dipped low, a young beaver surfaced near the shore, dragging a branch twice its size. It paused. Looked at me. then went back to work. I realized then that the HOA hadn't just underestimated me. They underestimated time. They underestimated history. And they underestimated a system that doesn't care about titles, money, or white BMWs. Nature doesn't negotiate. It enforces. A year later, the lake looked like it always should have. Clear water. Stable banks. Wildlife everywhere. The HOA still existed, but barely. Power stripped. Rules rewritten. Board members rotated yearly. No more presidents. No more empire builders. They learn the hard way what happens when you confuse authority with ownership. Every now and then, someone new moves into Willowbrook. A fresh face. A nice car. A clipboard under their arm. They ask about the lake. Someone always tells them the story. About the floating restaurant. About the fines. About the beavers. And about the man who didn't fight with lawsuits or shouting, but with patience and paperwork. I never released the footage. Never posted the photos. Never cashed in on the humiliation. I didn't need to. Because the lake still speaks for itself. On quiet mornings, mist rises just like it did when I was a kid. The water laps gently against the dock. Fish break the surface. The beavers finish their work and vanish into the reeds. And sometimes, I swear I hear my grandfather's voice. "Told you," he'd say. "Water always finds a way." So if your HOA is pushing you around, if someone thinks money lets them rewrite your history, remember this. You don't always need to push back harder. Sometimes you just need to step aside and let nature do the rest.